It's a fact. Donald Trump is now our president. And while many people are celebrating that, many others in our cities and communities of color are skeptical that they'll have a seat at the Trump table. And let's remember that this is just the beginning.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
It was a day when the theme of love for our country took center stage and brought everyone together, at the very least to witness history as the billionaire businessman became commander-in-chief. President Trump is promising to include those left out of the American dream.
The crime and the gangs and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
With President Obama leaving after 8 years, leaders in communities of color have voiced concerns that a Trump administration will put their needs last on the priority list and that race relations will suffer. But President Trump says it's time to take a cue in healing our divisions from the military.
It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget, that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots.
Just when the heated rhetoric and protests that marked the presidential campaign season seemed to have faded into the past, protesters flooded the streets of the nation's capital.
We will face challenges. We will confront hardships, but we will get the job done.
There are, of course, many questions about how that can happen. Let's take it to our panel now and find out what they have to say. Joining us, Dr. David Birdsell. He's the Dean of the Marx School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. He's also an expert on politics and government. David, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Lisa.
Thank you. Also with us is Charles Coleman, Jr. He's a federal civil rights trial attorney, a multimedia commentator, and also the founder of a youth mentoring program called EDGE NYC. Charles, thanks so much for being with us.
Always good to see you, Lisa.
We really appreciate it. Also with us is Michael Faulkner. He's the pastor of the New Horizon Church in Harlem. He's also a Republican candidate for the mayor of New York City, and he's a former New York Jets player, what they call one of the Jets' legends. Michael, thank you so much for being with us.
A pleasure, Lisa. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. David, I want to start with you. We've heard so many times over and over again these past weeks that this is an unprecedented presidency. Is that true?
It was an unprecedented campaign. He broke the rule book in just about every way it's possible to break it. He didn't form the kinds of coalitions that a traditional candidate forms. He tapped into a wellspring of anger, particularly in the middle of white America, the center of the country, tremendous support there. Very little support that Donald Trump harvested from cities in America. And you'll notice throughout the campaign, actually on both sides, both tickets, there was very little said about urban agenda issues and almost nothing coming out of the Trump campaign. So as we look forward to what a Trump presidency betokens, we really don't know exactly what that's going to look like. There will be a lot of infrastructure spending. That seems clear. He's talked about that repeatedly and again today. But we don't know exactly where that money is going to go, about $1 trillion. We've got to remember that in New York State, about $45 billion of our $160 billion budget comes from the federal government. So this could have a profound impact on the lives of New Yorkers and every income bracket, every community in the state.
And what's happening here in the city. Michael Faulkner, you're running for mayor of New York City on the
Absolutely.
Republican side.
Right.
Are you concerned that that New York City will get the money that it needs?
Actually, I'm excited because I think for the first time we're going to get more than we are putting out. I mean, New York City, we actually spend about $80 billion in taxes paid and only get back 40. So I think under this presidency we will see, not seeing everything dollar for dollar come back, but we're going to see more come back. And honestly, I'm not as concerned about the urban agenda because we know as Americans that the urban agenda is the American agenda. The majority of Americans do live in an urban environment. And so if we don't fix the infrastructure, don't fix the problems, the chronic problems that we have in urban America, we're going to go down the tubes. And that was the thing that I think we struggled with over the last 8 years for the president that I voted for, that just did not happen. We just did not move the ball far enough down the field to really say it was a success.
But remember, the economy was also in a tank. It was, I mean, we were on the verge of a big depression.
We went through a big recession, the worst one that we've had, but we didn't come out of it as we had predicted and so forth. And so there are a lot of factors.
There's a lot of unfinished business, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, Charles, in terms of communities of color, there's a tremendous amount of fear that I hear from people. What is your sense of the Trump presidency?
I think that answering this question has to be looked at from two angles. The first one is a very practical angle, and the second one is a very sort of principle-oriented angle. And the practical angle is this. You have to consider Donald Trump's appointments, who he's appointing to his cabinet, what their records are, what their positions have been historically with respect to communities of color. And when you look at that, it's all very troubling. Either people are woefully unqualified or their records with respect to civil rights, I'm speaking in this instance about Jeff Sessions as Attorney General in particular, are abhorrent and they're really, really problematic. And I think that from a practical standpoint is very, very troublesome because these are the people who are going to be responsible for setting, interpreting, and enforcing the policies that they set forward. And that can be very, very problematic, particularly for communities of color. Now, when you look at the principle-oriented end, I'm not sure how to interpret a Donald Trump presidency in as much as I don't know whether Donald Trump the president is going to match Donald Trump the candidate. I mean, we've already seen him walk back in many respects some of the things and promises that he tried to make in order to tap into that base of anger in white America that was already mentioned as part of the show. But what we will sort of see is that among the common voter, that level of the new normal in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the level of hatred, in terms of the level of just sort of outright and open bigotry that we've seen, that is not going away. And the fact that that has now been injected into the American discourse as something that's very regular is a problematic thing from a principle angle.
And I want to talk about more about the civil rights and also the concerns about bigoted actions and hate speech and that type of thing. But David, let me ask you, the point Charles made about the candidate Trump versus President Trump, historically, have those been has there been a split in previous presidents?
Actually, contrary to what most people think, candidates tend to cleave to their campaign promises. They at least try to get it done. In 1992, for example, Bill Clinton promised that he would reform the health system, and famously Hillary Clinton led that effort. It blew up on her in 1994, but they tried. It was the blueprint for the presidency, and it's very difficult given that Donald Trump during the campaign took very different positions on signal issues, and he's taking some positions now that are sharply at odds with the GOP majority in the Congress. For example, his promise to provide insurance for everybody. Everybody gets insurance. Well, that's a remarkable claim, very different from the plans that are still murky, but the plans being forwarded in the House and the Senate.
Michael, what about that?
Yeah, the thing is, the Affordable Health Care Act, one, wasn't affordable, wasn't great legislation when it went out. And I disagreed with it from day one. I was a candidate for Congress when it was being rolled out. I disagreed with it. It drove up the costs on the middle class, those who could pay. It covered a lot of people if they enrolled. Now, with regard to rolling that back, we have crossed the threshold in America where we do believe that all Americans should have access to good quality health care. That's not going to change. Donald Trump's not going to change that. The Congress is not going to allow that to be changed. We are going to see a plan come into play, in my opinion, that's more market driven, that's going to drive down the cost for all people across the board and give all those access to good quality health care. With regard to some of the things with regard to civil rights.
The appointments, what about with the appointments?
Some of the appointments are I understand what Charles is saying, and I would tend to agree with regard to track record, but everybody has to understand, nobody wants to see this split in America, wants to see us divided as a nation. It was the most divided campaign that we've ever seen in the history of our nation. Well,
but
since
whose fault is that?
Right. Well, I can't.
What attitudes are behind that?
Well,
does that mean people who are saying our lives matter too need to now take a back seat and keep their mouth shut?
Absolutely not. But it does mean that people that see the president that's elected, I mean, for instance, our mayor that is pro protested the legitimate election of a president. That's lunacy to me, and that's irresponsible rhetoric. We have a president that was elected. You know, people want to get into the whole notion of who helped and was it hacked and was that the Russians hacked the emails and so forth and so on.
You're saying get over it. We have to take a short break.
Okay.
This is Street Soldiers. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. We'll be back right after this.
January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again.
Charles, the narrative, you're talking about a narrative with the Trump presidency that greatly concerns you. Why?
Right, and I think that part of what we've seen is this conversation in the public sphere about unification of both parties and getting rid of bipartisanship. But again, there's a very big gap between Trump the candidate and Trump the president. This is a person who made campaign promises. David, you'll probably remember he was going to drain the swamp and that he was going to get rid of all the insiders. And what we've seen since he's been president is that he's appointed Washington insider after Wall Street insider after billionaire after, again, many of these people being woefully unqualified millionaires who are coming into Washington
in terms of government service, you're saying unqualified.
Right. And I can't let, you know, one of the things that happens when we talk about narrative, I can't let Mike's comment go earlier about the urban agenda being the American agenda. I take great issue with that, and I take great issue with it because if that were in fact the case, we wouldn't have dirty water in Flint, Michigan. We wouldn't be dealing with some of the problems that we've seen.
But the dirty water that happened in Flint, Michigan happened under the presidency, a black president, and a Democratic administration that should have fixed the problem.
Now that sounds great, but let's be clear. Let's be clear. That sounds great.
What about that?
Michigan has a Republican mayor. I'm sorry, Michigan has a Republican governor. Let's be very clear. Michigan has a Republican governor.
Is an entitlement for all
Americans. Who was chiefly you're conflating issues, Mike. You're conflating issues.
It's Michael, and I'm not conflating the issues. You brought it up, so I'm just pointing out that it happened on whose watch. And as
on the watch of Republican. Is the president responsible for that? Is the federal government responsible for that?
There are shared responsibilities at the state and federal level. In this case, there have actually already been criminal charges against people in the Snyder administration, and state government is largely held responsible for inaction in the case of Flint.
And if I haven't had a meeting yet with the president, but I do plan to do that and talk about the urban agenda. And one of the things that I'm going to bring up that they need to do immediately is fix the water system in Flint, Michigan. You talk
there's
about
other communities too where there's been water issues.
Other communities, listen,
and they all happen. Most of them happen to either be urban or rural poor, and many of them are in communities of color.
Just like the President Obama inherited a recession. This president, President Trump, has inherited an urban blight that has taken place before he became president, before he even began the campaign. And so we need to understand, in order to fix this problem, we've all got to work together. And
let's talk about who's going to be working together. David, in terms of the Trump administration, is this similar? I mean, we've seen in past administrations, Wall Street people, they have, they're involved in things, people that have a lot of money, millionaires involved in it. Is this an unprecedented level of that type of involvement of the top 0.001%?
Well, it's certainly been the case in the past that we've had people out of Goldman Sachs in the Obama administration, in the Clinton administration, but not so many, not such a concentration of wealthy people, not such a relatively a monoculture of wealth and privilege and of strong commitment to unfettered markets. That is unusual, and that is unprecedented in the Trump administration.
Charles, Barack Obama, when he was inaugurated, said that he was going to be the president for all Americans, regardless of the color of their skin. Do you feel that's the case with President Trump?
I think that's what the image. That's the image that President Trump intends to convey. I think that is something that he would like to certainly have as a claim to say. I don't necessarily know that we can say that thus far, especially when you talk about, again, his appointments. I'm less concerned with the rhetoric, although it has been problematic, and more concerned with the action. And at this point, the action that I've seen, I don't know that he can say that.
Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs will be made to benefit American workers and American families.
Let's talk about the issue of jobs, because this was one of the main campaign issues for President Trump. It was one of the things that many parts of the country, not just urban, but also rural and suburban, are concerned about. And people are saying, well, he's already put his money where his mouth is.
Well, you know, here's the thing. The conversation about jobs and putting some action already before he was even president is huge. We have got to begin to not just talk about, but to be about jobs. I've launched a campaign in my campaign to bring 500,000 jobs to New York in the next 10 years. Jobs is the greatest civil rights, the greatest equalizer. It is the greatest of all of the needs that we have is for the dignity that comes with work. The value of work is uncompromised. We have got to begin to champion that and to know that those things happen. And I believe that this businessman being the president will help us and will go a long way to doing that.
What about that, guys?
Well, I think it remains to be seen, and certainly in the spirit of generosity, I want to see what President Trump will do. But these one-offs with Carrier, with automakers, bring your jobs back, these are blips, they're smoke screens. Those are tiny numbers of jobs. I mean, this, you know, we create and eliminate tens of thousands of jobs every day in the United States. And we've got to remember that he's got the luxury of building on a record of an administration just passed, the Obama administration, that had the largest record of sustained job growth of any presidency in American history since the Second World War.
Is that true?
That is true.
That is
absolutely true.
Wait, say that again, David, because this is hashtag facts.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hashtag facts. Since we came out of the recession in 2009, we have had every single month net job growth in the United States. We have never had that long a record of uninterrupted job growth in the nation's history post-war.
Job growth, David, but what are the total numbers of jobs? We are still down 20 million jobs.
No, that's absolutely wrong. We're actually up above the pre-recession levels of job growth right now. We have lower labor force participation, but remember, there are more Americans. We're up just shy of 330 million Americans. We started this process at 314.
Yeah.
So even though we've had a growing workforce, we still have less labor participation, but a net increase in the number of jobs.
But when you say less labor participation, is that because, just so I understand what we're talking about, does that mean less people actually looking for work and more people?
Well, it's complicated. There are actually 7 measures of unemployment, and
right.
I'm not going to go through all of them. But the big factor here, Lisa, is age. Baby boomers like me are getting to the point that we don't want to work as much. I'm not sure we ever did, but we're getting to the point where we're retiring, and we're the biggest population cohort that's moving through the snake right now. So you're going to see.
So that's a factor.
That is an absolutely.
But let me talk about the youth, because that's obviously a big concern of our show. Yeah. Charles, you work with young people through your mentoring organization. When you see these young boys, are they being prepared for the types of jobs that we don't yet have in America, that we're losing, that they need with technology and these types of things?
I would argue that they're not, and I think that dovetails into another aspect of President Trump's administration, which seems really, really concerning, and that is education. Because what we are seeing throughout America, particularly with our education system, is that our young people are not being adequately prepared for the jobs that are going to allow them to be successful and to thrive. And so that's why looking at who he's appointing and their ideologies and their track records is critical, because what we can the writing is on the wall, and we can sort of forecast what the future is going to hold. We are no longer, and we haven't been for some time, an industrial culture. Right. That's not how we work. That's not how the global economy is set up anymore, and that's not where we're going to find our win.
I want to thank all of our guests for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Dr. David Birdsell, Charles Coleman Jr., and Michael Faulkner. Thank you all very much for being with us. And remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace.